Hi, and good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Lean Coffee Talk number one. It's actually the 51st podcast in this newly renamed series. I'm Mark Graban, joined by
Jamie Flinchbaugh. Happy Coffee Day.
Happy Coffee Day. We are recording these, and we used to record our podcasts usually Sunday evening or definitely evening, but it's morning. It's coffee time, right?
Yeah. It's hard to justify, even if it's convenient, to drink whiskey at 8 o'clock in the morning. So,
No.
so we are drinking coffee in line with our new format, new name, Lean Coffee Talk.
So do you want to kind of give the recap for people who didn't hear our last episode, kind of part of the thinking behind the restart, the rebrand, if you will?
Yeah, we'll be quick about it, but we've done 50 episodes of lean whiskey, and we were far from running out of whiskey to try. But mostly for my health reasons, I've cut back dramatically on drinking. There's no following the trend here, although there was a bit of episode 50 for those who want to go back and listen. We talked quite a bit about the market dynamics and trends around whiskey consumption and alcohol consumption. So, not being trendy, just being pragmatic. And but we both enjoy coffee. We both we're coffee snobs, just like whiskey snobs. We enjoy doing it right or well. Maybe well is the better term.
Yeah, and there's a lot to learn about coffee, similar to learning about whiskey or wine or cheese or other maybe unhealthy things. No, enjoyable things.
So I think we're both in the camp of we enjoy the exploration itself as well as the beverage. We enjoy the learning. We enjoy the depth and complexity. So this is our first Lean Coffee Talk. And you said episode 51 in the series. Not named after, technically, the Saturday Night Live skit.
Coffee Talk.
Coffee Talk. Talk amongst yourselves. It's but it does pay a little bit of homage to the famous Michael Myers skit on SNL, which happened to make a not so surprising appearance on SNL's 50th anniversary episode, which was very recent.
Yeah. So the Lean Coffee discussion format, which in a way was a bit of a springboard for the concept of the Lean Whiskey podcast. We're not voting on topics. We're not setting a timer, but it's kind of a conversational approach to the podcast. And we'll keep going here under Lean Coffee Talk. So if you're already a subscriber, you may have noticed that there's a transition with the name and the logo, but all of the old episodes are still in the same feed. If it's your first time listening, welcome to the podcast, and maybe you'll check out the old episodes because it was mostly lean type talk, a little bit of whiskey talk.
Yeah. It wasn't too much whiskey, but if you're here for the whiskey and you haven't been listening the whole time, you got 50 episodes to dive into, and get some of the whiskey talk. So we probably won't go. We were very particular about different themes, and we tried different whiskeys, and we may not go quite as deep in the coffee side. Perhaps as we did the whiskey, but we're starting right out of the gate with our theme of espresso. So,
and maybe the Sabrina. Do you know the Sabrina Carpenter song, the pop hit "Espresso" from maybe a year or two ago?
I'm familiar that it exists.
I think she performed it on Saturday Night Live, but maybe that helped people realize that the word is espresso, not espresso. We are drinking espresso, not to be a language snob, but it's an S, not an X. So we're both. It doesn't take long to drink a small. Would you know more about this than me, Jamie? Would you call this a shot of espresso?
I would, but we're probably both drinking double shots, which is fine.
Yeah.
Sort of the double shot is the new single shot, if you will.
Yeah.
But I'm at 40 grams, so it's it's a shot of espresso. I think figuring out the size doesn't matter, whatever size you prefer. But the basics. I mean, we won't go deep, at least not yet. But
we love talking about process.
we love talking about process, but fundamentally, it's extracted at pressure, small dose, but the caffeine is there, so higher extraction, so you get more of all the goodness, the oil, the juice, the good stuff out of the coffee in a lower volume, but you do that at pressure, and that's what's needed to make it espresso.
And when you say 40 grams, that's 40 grams like the bean weight that you grind?
The liquid and the coffee together. That's what's in the cup.
Okay. I think my machine does a single shot. Most coffee shops, I'll probably end up ordering a double because the cost is not double of a single shot because it's roughly the same labor to make a double shot.
And that's all. There's plenty. That's all they offer. So
yeah,
it's just what they're pulling all day for the other drinks where you're basically just trying to balance out a cup of warm milk. So
so we'll probably talk about that in other episodes. Beverages with warm milk. We can hear more maybe about your process. Mine is kind of the opposite of what you did, so I have less to talk about. I've got a very automated machine. It's the first time my wife and I have had this kind of automated espresso maker with real beans. It was a freebie. We bought a new dishwasher, and Miele, the company that makes the dishwasher and other appliances, makes this. They call it an automated beverage center.
Mm-hmm.
So you dump in beans, you fill water reservoir, and it's a pretty much push button kind of thing. So there are different drinks, including a button for a basic espresso. So that's what I've had here today. It's probably not as good as a local gourmet coffee shop with a process that might be a little more similar to yours.
Yeah. So mine is much less automated, and partly I enjoy. There's a Zen-like quality to just focusing on the task, right? And I'm immersed in it, and I'm focusing on my steps and my process, and that kind of ritual to me is almost as valuable as the drink itself. So, so we can go deeper into this in the future, but I grind beans. Beans are in an airtight container. I weigh them out. I put them in a single dose niche zero grinder that I have to dial in. Find the right setting for each set of beans that sometimes changes a little bit as the beans age.
The coarseness of
the
grind for different beans,
or fineness of the grind. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then I do puck prep, which includes leveling and tamping and other things like that. And then into my ECM German-made machine, and I time it and I weigh it so I get the right amount of extraction and the right amount of time. And if I'm not getting those two things balanced, extraction and time, then I have to change the grind settings. So that's how that all works. So it doesn't take long. It's still just a few minutes, but it's tasks, and if you don't pay attention, you're going to screw it up. So I would say, to your point around not as good as a local barista, I've now become spoiled. So I would say I can name a few coffee shops that I can drive to that do as good a job.
Yeah.
But most of them are a good distance away. So I have a hard time just, running down to a coffee shop and having an espresso because it's probably not as good as at home. But it is, and I kind of enjoy this part. It's an unforgiving process. You screw it up, you're going to have a bad cup. So get it right, and it's better. And again, that's all part of what I enjoy about the process of making my espresso.
Are there times when you have that first sip and you're like, nope, I'm going to dump that and try again? I mean, the cost of the beans, it's not that big of a cost of poor quality.
It's not the cost. It's probably more the self-frustration. And if it's not horrible, I'll drink it anyway and go, that wasn't the one. But yeah, sometimes you're just like, that wasn't even close. And it's usually when I'm trying to dial in a new batch of beans. And I probably made the mistake of opening a new bag yesterday. So I'm like, oh boy, it sometimes takes 3 or 4 days to dial it in. But I think I made an extra shot yesterday just to be like, okay, let me get dialed in before Lean Coffee Talk.
Yeah.
And I think I'm close. So yeah, it's not a horrible process from having to remake it if you have to, other than you just kind of look at yourself in the mirror and go, darn, made a bad cup of coffee.
Yeah. Well, more to come in the Lean Coffee Talk, the coffee part and the lean part. And I think when we do our next episode, I will be back from my first ever trip to Australia and in New Zealand,
which is a strong coffee culture.
That's what I just heard that recently. So my hosts and organizers at AME Australia, one of them mentioned that. So I will go check out the coffee shop culture, what they call it. This has nothing to do with whatever feelings people have about America right now, but the Americano beverage, or essentially the same thing. They call that a long black, as opposed to a flat white. And I think the flat white has origins in Australia. But I'll report back on what I learn and what I taste. I will definitely seek out the local coffee shops. I'll have time for that.
Yeah, we can cover the difference between an Americano and a long black in the future. And the flat white is an Australian origin coffee drink. So strong coffee culture. So sounds like with you and AME, an interesting trip to Australia, which if you're in Australia, you can join. So
yeah,
actually, if you're not in Australia, you can join too. You just have to go there.
Right. All right. So let me give the rundown of the Lean Coffee list of topics that we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about supply chain risk management, including tariffs. We're going to talk about some small changes at Starbucks. They made a change from more manual machines to automated espresso machines some years ago, and some people criticized them for that, right?
Yep, absolutely.
We're going to talk about Honeywell moving to break itself up, and we're going to talk about a word that I heard a lot of at a recent Toyota tour, a word raku. So stay tuned to learn what that word and concept is if you don't already know. So I'm going to let you kick off the first topic, Jamie.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about supply chain risk, and this is an increasing topic in all sorts of circles. You could almost say that the beginning of supply chain disruptions entering the lexicon was the Suez Canal blockage, and when the ship got turned sideways and stuck, but between climate change caused events with weather for hurricanes and fires and other things, geopolitical disruptions, and now tariffs. Supply chain risks are all over the place. You add cybersecurity to that, and you have even more. So I actually serve on the advisory council for the Center for Supply Chain Risk at Lehigh. They do a quarterly risk survey, a risk index, which we encourage people. Anybody can participate, and you get the report back each quarter. And you get to see what risks are going up and down and what other people say about those risks. So it's very useful to be paid attention to. But it means supply chain was almost all about cost management and optimization for 40 years, probably, maybe longer. And now I believe risk management is replaced cost optimization as the number one issue in supply chain management.
And it seems like one of the challenges is just the uncertainty, the on again, off again. I mean, we're recording this on March 12th. Different tariffs. President Trump has threatened them. They've been imposed. They've been backed off of. I mean, this has affected. I mean, we've heard the most, I think, about Canada and Mexico and aluminum and steel. But, I found an article here that there were tariffs threatened on Colombia, which is a huge coffee producer. The U.S., short of Hawaii, doesn't produce a lot of coffee. And it's probably fair to say Hawaii doesn't produce enough coffee for all of us to drink. So, the tariffs were threatened. They weren't implemented. But, the article from CNN said it still caused prices to go up.
Right. Yeah. And as we've always seen, and we're always all more aware of, because it affects all of this, is oil, right? Just a single military action will cause oil prices to go up, right? So it doesn't mean oil was hit. It just means speculation drives prices, and uncertainty is the worst factor. And that's been proven over time. The uncertainty is the worst factor. And so, coffee prices went up just out on a threat of tariffs. I think it was interesting a couple weeks ago, it was 2 or 3, Wall Street Journal went to live updates on tariffs, right? And so live updates mode, when the Wall Street Journal goes into live updates mode, it's usually for like a mass shooting or war.
Election day or lots of
election
updates.
Day or a major weather event. Basically, they're like, we don't have time to wait to write an article. It's happening too fast. And I've never seen it happen on something it really shouldn't happen on. And so they basically took tariffs to live updates. I've heard, just on tariffs themselves and other regulatory disruptions. I was in a webinar with a head of research for one of the Fed chapters, offices, and they do a lot of interacting with business. They said the number one, if they did a word cloud, the number one word would be uncertainty. There was a couple other panels of manufacturing companies that I've been involved in. Uncertainty was the major word. And, in places like capital equipment, what I'm seeing and hearing a lot, and this is more than supply chain risk, but a lot of purchase orders are just on hold. They're finalized, they just aren't getting released because people want certainty. So all of these are leading to, disruptions in management around supply chain challenges and disruptions.
Are manufacturers, I mean, I'm out of touch with this. Are manufacturers trying to time things of like, well, hey, we got a 30-day reprieve on the tariffs, so let's pull supply in faster if we can. We'll accumulate some inventory because we can buy it at the tariff-free price as opposed to the risk of waiting?
There's definitely bits of that. But it's very limited, right? So you can't spike up 6 months of demand in 1 month. Your capacity can't handle it. So there has been the import-export data has shown people trying to get ahead of it. And I've talked to numerous companies like, we took an extra couple of containerfuls and sent them to Canada ahead of tariffs. And so People did try to get ahead. Interestingly, that'll cloud economic data because it will have a temporary spike on some economic activity, just trying to beat the tariff windows. But obviously, one of the more consumer aware topics would be avocados, and you can't let me just get a 6-month supply of avocados and stick them on my counter. It doesn't work that way.
Not at all.
So there's people that did a bit of that, but it's very limited, and maybe 1 to 4 months, 4 months for maybe cheaper stuff, a 1 month for more expensive stuff. But I think you need to make whatever moves you can. Kind of what I tell people is make small moves. If you don't know which way the winds are going to blow, don't get too close to shore any one way, right? So you make small moves where possible. You forget optimization and you work on robustness. So you kind of say, what decision would be decent under all conditions, right? Tariffs at 50%, at 25%, at 0. Will this decision still be good under all of those? Will it be optimal? Probably not. But will it be good under any of those conditions? And then the other thing, this is really one of the tricks, is you have to have some principles in place, some heuristics or principles or rules to make decisions quickly, because you can't wake up on Tuesday morning, read the tariff news, form a committee, build a strategy. It's just the stuff happens too fast. So you kind of need some heuristics or rules in place where you can just go, and you know who's waking up, paying attention to it, and you know who's got a clear accountability to take the action. Because you can't go, hey, let's talk about this at staff meeting. It happens too fast. You got to be able to make the adjustments. So tariffs, of course, are just one. Other supply chain disruptions are all over the place. And so if you're dependent on supply chains, not just in it, not just are you professional in supply chains, but even if you're dependent on supply chains, supply chain risk needs to enter your lexicon and your awareness.
Yeah. And it's a word people are hearing so much more than they would have. I learned about tariffs in U.S. history class, and growing up in the 80s, Ferris Bueller's Day Off was a favorite movie of mine. And there's, of course, the scene that's been making the rounds, the economics, the high school teacher played by Ben Stein, talking about the negative impact of, I saw the clip. He called them the Hawley-Smoot tariffs. I think it's normally called the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. But he's like, did that help or not? Anyone? It didn't help. Or it didn't help the Great Depression. Anyone? But yeah, it's inherently a political issue, not just an economic issue. But the fact of the matter is, the tariffs are paid by the company that is importing the products, the customer. I've friends who had ordered some consumer products from Canada, and they got a tariff tax bill with the product because it had arrived. The timing was in a window where apparently the tariff was in effect. It's not paid by the exporting country shipping the goods in. It's the importer that has to pay it, right?
Not paid. Now there are again, it's just a transaction, right? So the official transaction is upon importing, the receiving party pays the tariff. Now, there's sort of 4 things that can happen. One, the company sending stuff, you can negotiate with them and say, hey, I got to pay tariffs. I'm not eating the whole thing.
I need a lower price.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so if they're desperate to import, you can ask them to lower their price. You can, of course, eat the tariff. I think it was Chipotle's CEO said, for a while, we're going to eat the tariff.
Pun intended.
Into our margins. So you can chew into your margins, which you better have pretty healthy margins to do that. You can, third, pass on the cost and raise prices to the consumer or the customer, depending on where you fit in the supply chain.
Right.
And then sort of third, depending on a combination of those three things, you can lower demand. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, okay, price, inflationary price, you buy less. Or, I'm going to import less because I'm going to have to pay the tariff. And so at every stage, you can say, I'm going to lower demand or lower consumption. And of course, that has a recessionary effect. So the worst scenario is, of course, we end up with a combination of inflation and recession.
Stagflation.
Stagflation. That's the nightmare scenario. But there are options within that. But the options are much easier at 5 to 10% than they are at 25 to 50%. At 25 to 50%, you consider wholesale changes, right? To what happens.
Well, and it seems like there's even more risk when it's like a tit for tat escalation situation of like, well, you've put tariffs on us, well then I'm going to raise the tariffs on you, and like where does that spirals in a bad direction potentially.
It tends to spiral, and then once it spirals, it tends to take a while to undo. Everybody goes back to their corners, but the shock waves are in effect. Similar to 70s when we had currency battles coming out of 71. It took almost a decade for all that to wash through and settle out across the globe. So we'll see. In the meantime, companies still have to operate. They still have to make decisions. World is uncertain. The tariffs are uncertain, and the supply chains are uncertain. You can't shut down. You can't wait. You got to be able to make decisions in that environment. And it's honestly what I'm spending a lot of my time doing is, as an advisor, just helping people through some of those decisions.
And some of that economic shock of the 70s that included oil prices and those economic conditions, or anytime there's a shock to an economic system, be curious to see what happens. I mean, arguably, that economic shock led to greater imports of smaller, more fuel efficient Japanese cars, which led to a little bit of economic protectionism, which led to the countermeasure of the Japanese companies starting to build cars here in the U.S., which leads to the spread of the Toyota production system and lean production. I'm not saying that looking for the silver lining, I guess, on some of that. I don't know if there's going to be a similar silver lining of whatever we come out of here.
Well, ultimately, there will be some positives that come out of anything, just because people will decide to do positive things, right? And they don't just happen naturally. So will there be positives? Yeah, absolutely. Mostly because we decide to do things, right? So, and it's just a matter of what generation pays for it, which generations benefit. And this is some of the challenges we face today, you can trace back to 71 and coming off the gold standard and which was necessary because the problems we faced in 71, you can trace back to Bretton Woods post-World War II currency agreements, right? And of course, that goes back to World War I. And so one major event to clean up the past mess will generate positive gains, and then we pay other prices down the road. It's just part of it. So we'll be in danger of going down a massive macroeconomic rabbit hole here. But
yeah. All right. Well, let's dig back into coffee a little bit.
Into coffee. Starbucks, who does not make a better cup of coffee than me.
Yeah, Starbucks is in the news. They are trying to figure out some things and revisit some old practices that may or may not boost business. So a couple of those include a return to free in-store coffee refills, which I think is limited to black coffee, which black drip coffee is their least expensive beverage. You can also do iced brewed coffee. They're not doing refills on frappuccinos and sugary, milky beverages. But I was in a Starbucks recently where I had some time to kill. I ordered a cold brew, which I think is it's a different price point than their iced brewed
Correct.
coffee. Speaking of, it's a different process that creates a different product. But they asked me, or was it for here or to go, which I don't remember being asked that in Starbucks in a long time, because the default for a while has been it's going to be a paper cup or a plastic cup. Mm-hmm. They don't, if you sit down or not. And so they served me the iced coffee in a pint glass, pint glass. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to sit and work on my laptop, and then I had overestimated the amount of time I had, so I had to ask them to pour it into a plastic cup for me to go. So there was a net that there was not an environmental benefit from that. But they're offering, and I don't know how. I'd be curious what percentage of customers are actually sitting and drinking their coffee long enough to get a free refill. They're doing that, and then the second thing is, long ago they went to this printed sticker that goes on the side of your cup that's got your name and the beverage, and they are trying to go back to handwritten names. And what I've seen, it's not replacing the sticker, but baristas and store partners are being encouraged to also write the name on the cup, or I've seen like a little, I think it was supposed to be a heart or a little star. And like, to me, I'm like, you know what? I don't know. I don't really value that. I don't mind that they're doing it, but
no, I don't. But I think so sort of all of this, Starbucks used to be, their strategy was third place destination. Mm-hmm. That was their explicit strategy. You got home, you got work, you got Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And if you weren't at home or work, then the next best chance was Starbucks. And, I kind of like to say that I wrote most of the Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean at a Starbucks because they didn't have Wi-Fi. And it was that's how long ago I wrote it. But, I went there in order to disconnect, right? But I'd spend hours there sometimes writing. So I think they're trying to go back to some of that. They've kind of focused so much on efficiency and the drive-throughs. They wouldn't open a new Starbucks unless it included a drive-through, because that's where they get their volume from. Mm-hmm. Where everything was about efficiency and just getting your drink. Just get the drink and get out, right? So I think a lot of this is going back to, basically vibes, right? And including, people that do like to sit in a coffee shop and work. Now, mm-hmm. I like to do that. It puts me in a different mindset. I don't go to a Starbucks. I go to one of these 5 places I know that I can get decent espresso. But mm-hmm. But the ambiance matters, and it's always a ceramic cup, and
right.
And so I could see myself sitting, at a Starbucks for, 3 hours and getting a whole bunch of work done and going to get my free refill in a ceramic cup. And I know they need the stickers at this point because it's part of their order flow, and mm-hmm. They can't just eliminate them. But again, a little touch. Some of it is the what I would imagine is that some of it is reminding the barista that there's a human being picking up the cup, mm-hmm. right? Because you're so much in the order flow, all you're dealing with is cups and coffee, and not even remembering there's a person there waiting mm-hmm. for their coffee. And it's like, this little touch, picking up the Sharpie and writing their name, writing mm-hmm. a symbol or whatever. It's like, just like, this is my little touch to you, human being. And so maybe that's, maybe their belief or their hypothesis is this will better connect barista and customer on a relational level, which I think is important. It should slow them down a little bit. Not much, right? It doesn't take long to do that, but I think to some degree it's kind of the idea. So
yeah. And then there've been a lot of complaints over time about how comfy chairs have been removed. You have a lot of tables and hard chairs, and there's some talk that they're going to go back to those easy chair. Well, is that the right term, or it's just a padded?
It's a comfy chair, a lounge chair or something. But yeah, it's there's a coffee shop I go to that has a little love seat, and then it's filled with tables. And it's interesting because the love seat's never taken. Now, partly there's nothing across from it, so it's like I sit there sometimes and read. But the other, there's no chair across from it, so you can have a conversation. So if you're going there for a conversation, you get a table, and if you're going there to work, probably get a table too. But I think the idea of just come in and be relaxed, right? Be relaxed and enjoy yourself. Sure, a comfy chair takes up more space. You can fit fewer people, and I think all of these things are, even if it costs us efficiency, whether that's floor space efficiency or barista efficiency, let's go back to what made us great. Right? And that's really hard for companies, whatever they did to make themselves great and to grow, whether that's their culture, their product, their value proposition, their systems. At some point, you risk losing it unless you pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, and I'll give them credit for trying to think through value instead of just being in a cost-cutting loop. But I mean, I think hopefully they're framing a lot of this as experiments. They have a hypothesis as opposed to solutions that they know are going to work, because the world is different than it was 20 years ago. I mean, I saw an article the other day about people are increasingly homebodies, which is still, I think, lingering pandemic effect, and you can try to recreate that third place, but maybe that's an era that has come and gone.
Maybe, but I think even with there's still a lot of work from home. There's a lot more freelance. The freelance economy, which began well before the pandemic, has continued to evolve. And there's no question. If I go to a coffee shop, I'll see half the people socializing, half the people working. And I don't think that's a bad mix. So I think I think if they may not be able to recreate some of the magic, because in a lot of ways, I still remember, and this goes back a long time ago now, when I was at MIT, Starbucks opened their first Center Square store.
I remember that. Yeah, I lived off of Central Square when that opened.
And there were other coffee shops around, but the debate was like, oh, Starbucks is going to run out these other coffee shops, and
it's gentrification of that area,
right? But those other coffee shops weren't good. They weren't good. That was the problem. So Starbucks at the time, I can say, was raising the bar on poor coffee shops. But now that's changed. Right now, the number of, if you're an independent coffee shop, there's a really good chance you're making a better coffee than Starbucks. And so the environment that you're in as Starbucks has changed because you did some of the things that you did.
Well, and I remember there were, it wasn't a huge crowd, but there was sometimes protesters and picketing going on. I remember actually I stopped, and one guy was alone, and he had an anti-Starbucks sign. And I'm like, why are you protesting? And he was a Harvard economics grad student, and he wasn't, fine. I just chatted with him for a minute, but the the local coffee shop, and I just pulled up on Google Maps. It's still there. 1369 Coffee House. Google describes it as enduring coffee house for hanging out. Like 1369 Coffee House was the kind of place that would have live music. You never get that at a Starbucks. And, it was just it's a different product. It's a different experience. And, that protester thought, well, Starbucks is going to drive them all out of business. And I was thinking like, well, these other coffee houses need to figure out how to compete.
Right.
Not be Starbucks.
Right. And some did and some didn't. Right. And I think for Starbucks, and this is true for any company, so everybody listening can learn this lesson. When you had a moment where you were more successful than you are today, there is a tendency to look back. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can look back and go, what made us successful then? But you also have to recognize what's different today, right? Sure. And again, Starbucks in their growth period didn't have the quality of competition that they have today, including home baristas, by the way, which is up their game, whether it's automated machines or people doing it other ways. So you can't go back in time. You're now competing in a different environment. And so you can always look back to learn, but you can't ignore the current state.
Sure. I mean, it would be like General Motors saying, when we back in the day when we dominated the market, we made huge gas guzzling vehicles. So let's return to what brought us greatness.
And you started with a Chevy, and then you bought a Buick, and then you bought a Cadillac, and you worked your way up the brand ladder.
You bought an Oldsmobile along the way, and but so here's the kicker. I pulled up Google Maps. The Starbucks on that corner permanently closed. 1369 coffee house outlasted the big bad corporate Starbucks. So I wonder where that Harvard economics grad student is today, but take that.
Take that. Yeah. They probably had no drive-through at that particular location.
Oh, no, it did not.
Although Boston, you don't need as many drive-throughs. Right?
No, it's a very walkable area, but
plus you're still competing with Dunkin' Donuts.
Dunkin'.
Dunkin'. So.
Yeah. All right. So tee us up to talk about Honeywell. I'm looking back like 20 years ago today. That was the name on my paycheck. That was the last manufacturer I worked for.
Yep.
Honeywell, the big spread out multi-business conglomerate that it was, and that's changing.
Yeah, that's changing. And conglomerates have been a thing for a long time. They really got almost ridiculous in the 70s. Gulf and Western was, one of these examples where they just bought up, they owned movie production companies and, defense contractors, like you said, they were buying stuff, right?
Yeah.
But at least conglomerates started to make more sense. They had more to do. They had more corporate overhead that would drive value, at least financial value. GE was always the monolithic, example that everybody tried to follow. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like Allied Signal, then Honeywell, was always a GE wannabe. Right. Mm-hmm. Like even the Six Sigma trend followed its way to
the CEO, Dave Cote, came from GE. He was the CEO when I was there. He was probably CEO at least 15 years.
Yep. So, and then, the guy, I can't remember now that came before him, but anyway.
Oh gosh. Was it Larry?
Yeah. No. Larry Bossidy.
Yeah.
There we go. So he's the one that wanted to be Jack Welch and brought Six Sigma in and did all of those things. Again, first Allied, then Honeywell. So Honeywell, in a lot of ways, has followed in the footsteps of GE. GE, not to go all into this history, it's not recent history, right? But GE brought in the CEO from Danaher.
A conglomerate to this day.
And one that got a lot more respect for its lean efforts, right. And proceeded to break itself up into pieces. With a combination of selling off things and then sort of in a final move, I'll say both material and symbolic. The final material move was breaking into 3 independent companies.
Right.
The symbolic move was selling off Crotonville, their corporate training center.
Yep.
And now Honeywell is doing the same thing. They are breaking into 3 pieces. One will be sort of their industrial conglomerate, and then they have now I forget what their 3 groups are. So that's one. What are their other 2 groups now? Really doesn't matter, actually.
We'll have a link to
We'll have a
Wall
link.
Street Journal article about this.
But they are breaking into 3 pieces, and they, the argument for GE was, less people focused on corporate overhead, on corporate initiatives, on corporate finance, more focus on close to the customer, value proposition, good operations, focus, and that's sounds good to me, right? And sure, you kind of have to put aside ego, say, hey, we don't run this giant monolithic enterprise. We're running smaller, nimbler companies. Yeah. But again, there's a lot of both economic, I'll say Wall Street benefit, economic benefit, customer and market, competitive benefit, a whole bunch of benefits that come along with that.
Yeah.
And so Honeywell saw the benefits that GE started to gain and said, yeah, let's do that too.
So, the aerospace business is going to be separated from the automation business. So, aerospace, being a pure play, that's the remaining GE ticker symbol is GE Aerospace.
Right.
So that's a pure play company now. Talking about other companies that have kind of split up. United Technologies. We had a lot of classmates. They were a partner in the MIT LGO program. That included Pratt and Whitney, Carrier, Otis, right?
Yep.
Those have been split up.
They were a client of mine for a while, and they had their own corporate lean program, corporate training center. Otis Elevator was part of that as well. So, United Technologies was a symbolic enterprise in that. In that, and again, another sort of Connecticut-based one at that. So,
but there's the total unwinding model, and then Danaher kind of split roughly into 2. Alcoa split into 2 separate companies. But the remaining Danaher still has a broad set of businesses, but they describe themselves as being much more focused now on biotech and life sciences and in diagnostics, where Danaher used to be much more diversified, of making tools and all kinds of different equipment, and the life sciences. I think they spun off stuff that was not in that category, so it's less conglomerate-y.
It is. I think it's at least more focused, right? And so I think you really have to ask yourself, besides financial engineering, which is real and does have a material impact on an organization. We can't deny that. If you have a market that has ups and downs in the financial cash flow, you can ride one wave because another wave is up. Right, those things matter, and that's one of the arguments for the whole, large enterprise conglomerate is the financial.
You're hedging, you're smoothing out, hopefully.
But you're also, weighted average margins and cash flow and things like that. So, but I think the argument is be less focused on corporate overhead stuff, more focused on delivering value, operating close to the customer, being fast and nimble. And I think that's a fantastic shift for corporate culture in general. And I hope it leads to, just if you look at, career paths for people, fewer people wanting to be in corporate overhead roles that are sort of driving things that other people have to do, and more people working on product, working in operations, making stuff, right, serving customers, and that's kind of the core work that all these companies exist for.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love the trend. I hope it. I hope it continues, but more so, I just hope it gives people to think about what are the activities fundamentally that are truly adding value, and let's not lose sight of that.
Yeah. So on that theme of adding value, let's move to our fourth topic: value-added work at the front lines. I had an opportunity to visit for the second time. I'd been there about 16 months ago. The Toyota plant in Georgetown, Kentucky, TMK, and they had mentioned this before, but maybe it was this particular tour guide really, really, really emphasized the theme and the word. Even though the concept was familiar, this is not a word that I really, really knew, and it's not a word I use. Raku, R-A-K-U. And he described that as is translated from Japanese to mean either, ease or comfort. And the one example, which they had talked about on previous tours, was at one point with the assembly line, the doors are off the vehicle. Team members are installing a lot of interior components. Instead of leaning in and reaching over, and a team member had the idea borrowed from a bass boat of like in a chair that rotated and moved. I don't know anything about fishing or boats, but they had the spark. They had this idea, and they prototyped something using, I think, literally a bass boat seat before they built something more permanent countermeasure. But it's this chair that's on kind of like a cantilevered arm, and they can kind of swing, slide into the vehicle. Easier work, better ergonomics, better productivity, win-win kind of situation. And they were talking a lot about all these different Raku devices, assists, things that would help a human hold a tool instead of automating the work with a robot, making the work easier for humans. Now they pointed out, look, they do have some tasks, some jobs that they have automated, but not in the spirit of replacing employees, but from a standpoint of safety, repetitiveness in some cases, quality. Their new paint shop, they said, is completely automated, which in the past was not true. They would talk about how welding and painting, some things are done better by a human, some things are done better by a robot.
Right.
But their focus was really on, when I think back to learning about Kaizen, it was kind of drummed in that the priorities were easier, better, faster, cheaper. And so that emphasis on easier often leads to those other outcomes. So I appreciated the strong emphasis, throughout that tour of, kind of Raku.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think people have to think about why they're doing it, right? So it's not like we don't want to just do Raku because Toyota's doing it, right?
Right.
But we used to always, go do a Gemba walk, but look for burden, right? So burden is the evidence that there's an opportunity for Raku.
Overburden, yeah.
And so burden was a word we would use very often in direct observation. Go find burden. And of course, there's the benefit to the human. Happier employees are good. Safer employees are good. But I'd also say at least 3 out of 5, I don't have any data on this, but just my evidence would be at least 3 out of 4 times, if not 9 out of 10, somewhere between those numbers. Easier is also more efficient.
Yep.
And I go back to my first really big learning line implementation, which we did on the front sway bar assembly for minivans long decades ago at Chrysler. And so this was a group, I think we had, how employees were involved? Maybe 40 or I guess across shifts, probably about 80 or 90 across all three shifts in this sub-assembly line. But we implemented in a handful of months 900 improvements. It was a lot. We kept track for a reason. We had massive downtime reduction along with other things, and that's a whole side story. But many of the improvements were things that you would consider Raku. Even the main frame that we would drop down, sort of the body of the sway bar assembly, what somebody had to do is they had to take the angle nut runner, and I think it was 6, but they had to run 6 nuts down. And so what we did is we built a fixture where you brought the whole thing down, and it had built in 6 nut runners, and you just settled it into place, and you ran all 6 at once. And so the weight of the machine provided the force. You didn't have to kind of lean over it. You didn't have to, seat each one separately and reach a whole lot, and you could comfortably bring this thing down. And that was just one, but of the 900 improvements, at least a third would probably be described as Raku improvements.
Yeah. And I mean, I like your point about don't do something because it's trendy, but there could be worse trends in the world of business or manufacturing or healthcare or lean than, oh my God, everyone's focused on making work easier and more ergonomic and more comfortable. Like that. Do you want to co-author a book called Toyota Raku and try to make that the new trend?
But I think to your point is it's not a bad thing, right? To just say, hey, make work easier for people. It has its own benefits.
Yes.
And again, if you're trying to convince somebody, whether it's your plant controller or your CFO or your plant manager or your engineer, that there will also be efficiency gains, even if you can't do an ROI on each one. But again, just finding burden tends to be I don't want to say a code word, but it's just underneath burden, there's other stuff, right? Yeah, whether it's efficiency, whether it's true safety concerns, whether those are ergonomic safety concerns or injury risk concerns. Almost anytime you find burden, and even if it's for no other reason than when there's burden, there are shortcuts, or at least there's an incentive for shortcuts, right?
That creates all kinds of risks. That
creates other risks, right? Quality risks and others. So removing burden, even down to, hey, what about reduced turnover? That's everyone benefits from reduced turnover. So if we reduce the burden, do we reduce turnover? Can I measure it? Probably not. Is it there? Absolutely.
I think that flow of easier, better, faster, cheaper is very much in line with SQDC, safety, quality, delivery, cost.
Absolutely. Yep. And so do all of them, but when you have to make a trade-off, easier, look for easier first. Right?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up. Like I think we've sort of tried to commit, like, note for the listener to do hour-long episodes, like lean whiskey. I don't think because of the whiskey, those were usually more like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Plus, minus, and maybe sometimes we'll be on a roll and not have a schedule constraint. That's more likely to happen when we do a morning thing. We have another meeting as opposed to finishing the podcast and finishing the whiskey and going to sleep.
Right. Yeah. It's the whiskey. The only thing that really limited it was what time we wanted to wrap up. We usually brought a bottle with us to refill if we needed to.
Yeah. We did pause to go get more coffee. Like if we're doing an episode on drip coffee, you could have a carafe.
Well, absolutely. I'm sure when we do a pour over or some other things or a French press, I'll have a couple of pours, but so a little tighter, if you want to call it that, at least shorter, if not tighter, but still pretty casual. That's our thing, right? But we're still going to wrap up with some fun. For the first 50 episodes, we tended to do sort of get to know Mark and Jamie question. And we probably could call this podcast the Mark and Jamie Show, but while we recognize some people, listen in just to hear us talk, maybe we just don't have the egos to do that.
Right.
But we are going to kind of shift the closing question. Still fun. And we'll experiment. We may shift this again, but basically we're going to end each episode with a recent cultural share. And what I mean by cultural is anything we've read, watched, experienced, done, listened to, tasted, just something we've experienced culturally that we want to share with others. And so we're going to wrap up each episode with something we've experienced. So why don't you start us out there?
All right. So in this case, it's going to be something that I've been watching. Finally, I had a lot of people recommend a Netflix series called The Diplomat. And so over the course of a couple of weeks, we binged. I mean, it's 6 episodes of each, seasons 1 and season 2. Really enjoyed it. See, we didn't have to suffer through the long pause between seasons with the cliffhanger. Yep. At the end of season 1. But now we're anxiously waiting season 3, which is supposed to be coming this fall. So Kerry Russell plays the one lead character, the woman who's the newly named U.S. ambassador to the UK. And there's a lot of geopolitical international twists and turns, at least in that special relationship between the U.S. and the UK. So, it's a fun show. I mean, it's a little cliffhangery and, even from episode to episode, but definitely recommend it.
Yeah, we watched it. I'm glad I got to watch it in more of a bingey matter. It was over a few weeks. But boy, season 2 ended and I'm like, I really wish I waited till this whole thing was.
I called it the twist, the thing that happened. No spoilers. The thing that happened at the end of episode 2. I think it was maybe even between episodes 5 or 6, or at some point. That was my prediction of like,
okay,
I think that's going to happen.
Okay,
I wouldn't have guessed the circumstances.
No, that was probably pretty hard, but I like how it ended, and so great show, lots of drama if you like that kind of stuff. Very, very intriguing. Mine was a little more real. So on Netflix again was a docudrama, and I love history and enjoy that. And but watching some documentaries can sometimes be a little dull unless it's Ken Burns. He always makes it interesting. So docudramas where you have actors portraying characters and you cut between narration and actual scenes, it kind of makes it a little more engaging. So Netflix had a docudrama series called Rise of Empires. And the one, I was basically watching the Ottoman Empire, specifically a whole season of Mehmet II's capture of Constantinople, which was when the Roman Empire, lost Constantinople. They had been sieged and attacked 27 times, and Constantinople was just this beacon that could not be conquered. And Mehmet II of the Ottoman Empire finally took Constantinople, and it's an iconic moment in European history. Changed the landscape of Europe, and I just thought it was really well done because it really gets into the characters, the motivations, and of course battle tactics as well. So that was actually my wife doesn't enjoy those, so that was treadmill rowing machine watching. But I enjoyed that quite a bit.
All right, well, good. Hope people check that out. So I've got a lot of Netflix and a little bit of Amazon Prime Video downloaded onto my iPad for
a trip to
whole long flights. They have the built-in entertainment screen, but sometimes I like to have my own.
Yeah, that's very limited. I mean, there's lots of stuff, but still not a lot of good options. So,
yeah. So, all right. Well, Lean Coffee Talk number 1 / episode 51 in our series here. It was good.
Fantastic. I enjoyed it. As always, good espresso. A little more dialing in for me to do my methodology. And until next time, I hope everyone has a wonderful time.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.